Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first lesson of the new Bootcamp, the version 2 C Sharp. Well, no longer C Sharp, but rather full stack from zero to hero. Please let me know if you hear me well, if you can see me, if you can see my screen as well. And if all is good, we will slowly proceed. Before all, I'll try to introduce to the bootcamp itself, like what activities we'll have, what do I plan, and then we'll go on with the rest of stuff. All right. In that case, let's get started. So, as I already mentioned, the idea of bootcamp is to go through different stacks of technology rather than different stacks, but different technologies in general. So we'll start with the most simple technologies out there, console application and WinForms. That'll be your first month. Your second month will be creating creating web services using ASP.NET Core. So that'll be the second month. We'll use HTTP requests and create a RESTful API. For the third and fourth months, we will be using React, and we will try to create a communication between client and server side. So we will have like a proper web application with a backing server. Basically, with those 4 months, you should have enough knowledge to make something useful, no matter what you want to do. So hopefully that will be a good experience. I mentioned 4 months, but after those 4 months, we will continue working on other things as well. But I'm not yet sure what. I have in mind maybe databases, sorry, not databases, but maybe cloud, maybe mobile apps, things like that. But I'm not sure. It depends how you guys state your opinion. So every month we will try to solve a problem. We will not just, make hello world applications and create dummy ideas just to simulate the concept. We will instead take a specific problem, which will be in this wiki here. So every month you open this, expand, and you will see a problem, for example, problem 1, which we'll try to go through and solve. And yep, give me a moment to adjust chat so I can see you better. And yeah. So I really care about your feedback. So if you are taking notes or have something to say, want to express your opinion, please let me know. I'll mark it. But other than that, I think we're good to go. So first, let me double check the chat. Basically, I will finish my point and then go through the chat points. And every, let's say, 10 minutes, I'll go back to chat to see if I didn't miss anything essential. So from all the things that were written, Levi asked about thoughts on Blazor instead of React. We will use React because it's more popular. I won't comment on Blazor anymore, simply because it's experimental. Can we use MVVM with WinForms? Yes, we can. I will try to show how. And yes, that's a good point. I should press enter to announce the lesson on Discord as well. So regarding Discord, I'll jump to Discord voice after the lesson is the theoretical part is over, then I will talk with students and help them if they have any specific problems. But I will not sit in Discord because, I mean, you can clearly hear me as well on YouTube. And I don't want to split my attention between the two medias for now. All right. So the first problem, which we will be solving with the very, very basics of programming, the fundamentals, is a recipe converter. So cooking is an interesting area because it has a whole bunch of different units, as you can see here. Here is a gallon, a cup, fluid ounce, pint, quart, tablespoon, and teaspoon. And each has their own SI unit. And I mark them as liters or milliliters, whichever makes more sense. And our goal is basically to take a unit and standardize that. Take a cup and turn it into liters, or take a teaspoon and convert it to milliliters. That is our goal. That's what this application will do. So in the end, we will open a recipe, paste it in our application, and expect that to be converted into standard units. Or vice versa, if we give it standard units, we will try to convert it into something that makes sense in the cooking world. So that will be the first problem we will solve. And here are the requirements. For today, it will be barely 1 point of this whole thing. We will just start learning something, how we can read user input and how we can make arithmetic operations with it. All the stuff that you need, all the references should be in the video description. So regarding video description, if you look at the video description, probably you need to click the show more button. So if you open that, there should be a cheat sheet as well as a whole bunch of links. So those links include a feedback survey, the lesson, Wikipedia page, for example. You can find this one in here. So everything from zero is written for you in a very, very easy to understand form. And now let's continue. Every application, it doesn't even matter if it's C# or a different kind of program, it starts from a project with configuration and stuff like that. So I'll open Visual Studio, and please follow along with me because the pace I am going to do this is going to be pretty slow, so you can, follow along. So open Visual Studio and something similar should appear. And then click Create a New Project. If I am being too slow, please write a plus. If I'm being too fast, please write a minus. So click Create a New Project. And then in the window here, type console so that only console projects will appear. And you will see a whole bunch of projects: C#, VB, JS, F#, and so on. But the one we care about is C#, ASP.NET .NET Core application. Not ASP, but .NET Core application. So I select that, next. And I will name it Recipe App. I'll select the folder for the Bootcamp, and mine is here. And I'll call this a Recipe App. Please note how this solution name also gets modified as you change the project name but not vice versa. Soon you will understand why. Then I hit create. And a new window opens. And inside that new window, you can have your first application. So take a moment to familiarize with all that you can see. Basically, this is how every programming application starts. That's the template for nearly every beginner application. The code that you see here prints hello world into the console window. How do you run this code? Well, there are two ways. You either click this button or press F5, Control F5 or F5. So I'll press Control F5, and here you see hello world printed in the console. Very simple stuff so far. What you see here is an entry point for a console application. So every application has an entry point. This block of code is the entry point of our application, and it does whatever is in between these curly braces. Entry point can be anything, the method name doesn't matter, the class name doesn't matter, but those are defaults. If you change them, you will mess things up a little bit, and it will not work without extra configuration. So let's start making more interesting things and write our own code. Again, all the code blocks like Console.WriteLine is within the video description. If you want to copy paste, you surely can. I'll refer back to the problem itself and copy paste this table, because that's the only thing I'll be needing for today. I'll paste it here. I'll delete this. And here is text. But if you look at this closely, this text is colored differently. This is because this text is actually understood as code. There is no such code that could properly evaluate to this text, and therefore everything is underlined in red. When you have red underlines, it means something is wrong. Therefore, however, this is very useful for me because it is a note for myself what unit translates to what unit, what cooking unit translates to what SI unit. So I need all this. And basically, to turn this into a note or a comment, in other words, I need to use special characters. So / is a comment. And if I put / and a star, it allows me to have a multi-line comment, which I will do right here. So an opening / and a star and a closing / and a star. And here I have a multi-line comment. And there is a third way. Let me delete this. The third way is if I select everything and press Ctrl+K+C, it also comments out everything. So this is a note for myself. This is not code, this is just a comment. So this will not get evaluated. And the first thing I will do, I will try to read input in milliliters and convert that into some unit from here. So let's try that. So how do I read user input? I first need, so in order to read user input, I will need to write Console.ReadLine, which literally says what it does. It reads the line. As you type the function name, there's always a hint, a comment on that function which says what it does. As you can see here, this readLine function, it says, reads the next line of characters from the standard input stream. Those might be tricky words, but simply said, this reads user input from the console. And as I wrote Console.WriteLine, the same way I write Console.ReadLine. Let's see what happens if I run the application right now. It stopped and nothing is happening. Why do you think the application did not print hello world? Why did it stop? I can still type things in it. And I can even type a unit, for example, 100. Exactly, it is waiting for user input. So if I type something, it then proceeds to the next line and eventually stops. So I need to give it some input. And actually, right now, to make this more meaningful and logical, let's prompt for an input. Please enter user input. And as someone noted very well, we need to store that input into some variable. And a variable which stores text is called a string. The type which stores text is called a string. So for now, I'll just call it input. And try this again. So Control F5. Please enter user input, and I type 1, and then it terminates. Everything works as expected, but we're not doing anything with this. And in fact, there are still quite some puzzling pieces in the application that we didn't talk about, which is worthwhile understanding. So the best way to, understand what things do is by trying to remove them temporarily. So what happens if I remove using system statement? Immediately it says that, well, what is console? Where does it come from? And the answer to that question is, it comes from a system namespace. A system namespace has a class, just like our program class, but this class is called console. So console comes from a using namespace, from a system namespace. And a namespace is simply a collection of different classes. So import everything from system namespace, and not everything but classes. And this one is holder of classes. And actually a namespace is very much like a folder. Basically, recipe app, I'm at the root of the project. So recipe app has is like a root namespace. So my default namespace in the project is named after the project. And all that is within this namespace is shared within this namespace scope. And a scope is something that is marked with these curly braces. And I can, expand and remove stuff indicating the different scopes that I have. So I have 1, 2, 3 scopes in my program: namespace, class, and function scopes. Stuff that is in this scope is not accessible in another scope. For example, if I create a new function, this variable will not be accessible in that function. So we use a using statement to import all the classes from a namespace. A namespace is a collection of classes, is a holder of classes. A class is a holder of functions. And a function is a block of code which has a name. So this is a variable. A variable holds data. And that's all you need to know. And a variable has 3 things. It has a type, name, and a value. And it always has to have those 3 things if we want to use it. So right now, let's do a pretty silly thing. Simply output what we input. And I'll say input. And if I run, if I press 1, what do we expect? We expect 1 to be printed again, which happened. So it means we are practically using our variable. It's being printed. Right. But this variable is text. If we want to do meaningful things with it, we will not be able to. There is something more needed. So what do we need to do if we want to take input and perform some sort of conversion? And here I will specify what do I expect. Please enter teaspoons count amount. And here I would like to convert the teaspoons amount into milliliters. How do I do that? Mathematically speaking, converting teaspoons into milliliters would be as simple as you take teaspoons and then you multiply them from 4.93 because that's how many milliliters does 1 teaspoon contain. However, if I try and do that right now, it will not work. And if I hover over, always errors are your friends. It says cannot apply operator to operands string and double. This multiplication sign is an operator. This is a string and this is a number. What happens when we multiply text from a number? I don't know. The program, the Visual Studio doesn't know it either. And we need to be working around to help Visual Studio understand better how can we multiply text from a number? In other words, we need to convert that text into a number. So let's try and do that. Let's convert input into a number. So our input is text, and I will rename it for now. I'll call it teaspoons text. And the unit we need is a number. And we can have teaspoons like 1 teaspoon, 1.5 teaspoon, 2 teaspoons, and therefore for numbers that have a fraction, we will be using a double type. So I'll say teaspoons amount. The actual amount, not the text, is double dot parse, and we pass in teaspoon text. Again, I'll start slowly. Double is a type similar to a class, but not quite. We'll talk about this later, the difference between the two. And then I call a method from that class, method parse, and I pass in teaspoons text. So just like our write line, we're now, just like a write line from a class console, we call parse, method parse from a class double. And we pass this teaspoons text as input. And again, if I hover over this method, it says converts the string representation of a number to its double precision floating point number equivalent. So it converts a string to a number. And we are done with that. We have a number. If we have two numbers, then we can surely multiply them together. And again, double is the type that I want, and I'm multiplying teaspoons into from how many milliliters are in a single teaspoon. So let me separate this neatly. And now I can print the result. So let's try it out. If I write 15 and hit enter, it prints 73.949999. You might be interested to see where are all those 9s coming from. After all, if I do the same operation in a calculator, so we had 15 times 4.93. It's 73.95. It's quite exact. But we have this 0.00000001 inaccuracy. Where is it coming from? Is it a leak in memory that we have just introduced? Or is there something more? So this number with fraction, a double type, is called a floating point number. And it has double precision. You'll soon find out why. And literally what the floating point number means is that there is a small bit of inaccuracy that can appear whenever we perform mathematical operations, arithmetics. And there is no way to control that. So when working with these kind of numbers, you need to take that in consideration. If you want absolute accuracy, for example, if you are making scientific calculations or if it involves money, use decimal in that case. Let's try to change that into a decimal number. And decimal is M. Short for decimal is M. By default, a number with a fraction, if I don't do anything and hover over it, it says it's a double. But if I write letter M, is a double, is a decimal, is a double. Letter M basically converts that number into a decimal. So it says decimal times decimal is a decimal. What will happen now? Will we see the same inaccuracy we saw before? The 9999999 in the end? Let's try. So again, 15. And now it works exactly like the calculator without that inaccuracy. So if you want absolute precision, use a decimal. If you don't care about precision, but you are planning to make arithmetics, use a double. In our case, the precision doesn't matter as much. We would rather have, smaller space and faster calculations rather than very high precision. So use a double for arithmetics. And then there is float, one last type. And there is double. There is float. So decimal, use it for money. Is a float. Use it when you don't plan to make calculations. Don't plan to use math. Yes, and someone asked, why don't you use decimal then? It does indeed, is at the same time slower and takes more memory. So by default, for numbers, if you don't know anything, what will you need to do with them? But it will have a fraction. Use a double because it's the default for a number with a fraction. So that is a simple example of a very of a very simple conversion. Right. So let's create a properly printed statement. A properly printed statement. And I mean, we can do arithmetics with numbers, obviously, but can we do arithmetics with text as well? Let's try something out. What happens if I add text together? For example, what happens if I say hello world here? and add that to milliliters. Again, the amount, I don't care as much. It says hello world without a space, and then prints again the double milliliters amount. Basically, with a plus sign for text, we can concatenate, combine, stitch two pieces of text together. So literally this gets converted to text, this is text, so text plus text is more text. So we stitch text together. And let's make this more meaningful. So we will say what we converted. We converted teaspoons of text. Teaspoons of text, so teaspoon. We convert that to milliliters. So the full thing would look like this. If I run the application now, which again basically just stitches a single string together for a proper output, we'll see something like this. So it says 2 teaspoons equals 9.86 milliliter. It's actually interesting because you don't really see that inaccuracy anymore, even though we are using double. But if I change the numbers like 15, the higher the number, the more complex the arithmetic operation, the worse this inaccuracy gets. And obviously, this is not what you would like to show to a user. And on top of that, this is not that great of a code. It doesn't read that well. And I mean, something that is so fundamental as stitching different pieces of text together, there has to be a more clean way of doing that, right? Something more natural to read. So anyways, avoid putting stuff as an argument and at the same time performing operations. Don't perform operations into, a WriteLine statement. Preferably dedicate a variable for that. So I'll do that. Basically, I will say converted amount, converted description maybe, and I'll paste what I cut. Convert the description and I paste what I cut. Cut, standard thing, you just select Ctrl X and Ctrl V for pasting, for those who are not as proficient. And I'll just type again this into the function as an argument, pass this into the function. I forgot to say that as you type, if you hit tab, it autocompletes. So I hit tab and I have this still awful, but slightly better way of writing a descriptive response to a user. What did just happen? So again, I'll write 999 maybe. And again, this is actually interesting because it was converted kind of decently, but again, it's not stable. Anyways, this is kind of what we want, but we want, for this to work with different numbers, and we always want the precision to be up to 2 digits after a decimal point. So how can we format a string in C#? before we answer that question, let's first figure out how to make this more readable. I'll comment this out for you to have a comparison, and at the same time, I'll copy paste this once again. And I'll delete everything. So obviously we need a string, and no matter what you do, it will start with this. And what I will be doing now is called string interpolation. Interpolation as in it allows us to add strings together into one. So a $sign allows us to do string interpolation. What does that mean? That means that we can have placeholder variables and concatenate them without the plus sign, which makes it so much more readable. So I can immediately type teaspoons text, and then I don't need a plus sign anymore, and I can simply type teaspoons. Teaspoons as a readable text, and then I can say it's equal to milliliters. So it looks really funny, I think, because this looks like it's a duplicate, but actually what happens is that whatever you put in between those brackets, it takes the value from here and stitches it in this place. So it takes the value from here and it stitches it in this place. And what happens in the final result is the same as you have in the above. So if I run this code right now and type 15, you can see that nothing changed. But if you compare this and this, you can see clearly that these two are completely different in terms of readability. This is unreadable and this is very readable. So when you need to work with two or more strings in a text, always use string interpolation. Lastly, we didn't solve the last question. How do we format the string? How do we cut it? How do we say that we just want those two numbers after the decimal point? And when it comes to formatting, all you have to do is write a column and then say F. F means fixed point, that it no longer takes a varying floating point decimal which can change its position and create an inaccuracy. This means that F2 means 2 points after decimal, 2 digits after decimal point. So this allows us to format things. 2 points after 2 digits after decimal point. Super simple, and if I run this now, you will have consistent results regardless of what number you type, and it can be a ridiculously big number. And it still gives exactly 2 points after the decimal. I don't remember if it matters, but I don't think so. So 15, you can see the exactly same output. So very easy, simple way of formatting. And you can, as you can see, there are different ways how you can format it. You can even, make this a hexadecimal, for example. exponential fixed point. There was a hex as well, but I cannot see it. Well, doesn't matter. Currency, anyways, all sorts of points. I prefer to write capitalized. I don't know why, but it doesn't really matter. So very simple. And let's continue. So we have a few blocks of code that do different things. For example, this is actually the same logically one thing. We are getting user input and converting that into teaspoons amount. So things, blocks of code that logically are for one thing should be moved into a function. And I'll create a function now. So I simply cut the code, the block of code, and say static. For now, all functions will start with word static. Ignore it, just think it's a rule. So it starts with static, and then we say double. And then we say prompt teaspoons, or more like get teaspoons from console. And actually, this also belongs to that. So get teaspoons from console. And we need to do something. So before we fix this function, let's understand what's wrong. It says, so we have two messages. One of them is an error and the other one is a warning. The fact that we don't use this function yet is simply a warning. It doesn't matter. This is the error itself, and it says not all code paths return a value. What does a return mean? A return, so every function, when I call this function, when I call this function, when I call any function, they have to return something. In our case, the type that we return is a double, and it's written before the function name. So this is the function name, and this is its return type. And I need to return some double. So I'll put a return here because our function says get teaspoons from console, and this is literally what we're getting. So we return the teaspoons, and now I'll say double teaspoons equals get teaspoons from console. Again, I just pressed enter because it allows me to autocomplete. Sorry, I pressed tab, but I'll type this as well. Get teaspoons from console. Boom. And that is done. We have teaspoons. Voila. Awesome. So teaspoons, I just replace stuff with what I have, and I am done. I moved a block of code into a function, and I made the code slightly more easy to read. If I read the main function now, I no longer need to read how I get teaspoons from console. I just know that I do. A function tells me what I can do with it. How, it doesn't matter. If I care, I'll scroll down and read. And someone asked, does it matter where I place my function? And the answer is, the program doesn't care, but you are not writing code just for a computer to understand. You're writing code for another human being. First of all, yourself. You will be the one reading code, so figure out how to optimize code readability. And therefore, code should read like a book. What do I mean by that? At the top, I put the most important things. I'll slow down a little bit. So code should read like a book. At the top, right here, I put the most important parts of my program. So the most important part of the program is obviously how I started. So the entry point of a program is very important. And basically the entry point of a program is the highest level block of code. Highest level means that it calls something without knowing how that something works. It just calls it. And the less things I call myself, the less things I make myself, but rather call, the higher level I am. So the less I make myself, the less a function makes itself, implements itself, the higher level it is. Main function simply starts the application. So it is the highest level function. And this one, get teaspoons from console, is a lower level function because it implements how we can read a number from a console. It just consumes. So the key difference here, main consumes another function. But this one, it actually implements something. So based on this logic, we are actually not being very true to our description. If we said that main should just consume other functions, it should actually consume this function as well. So I'll take this and cut it and create another function. And basically it will be called, how will it be called? Not the greatest, but for the simplicity's sake, that'll do. Okay, that won't do. Let me think. I'll take this block of code and convert it into a function. Sorry for confusion. I'll take this block of code and convert it into a function. Static double to teaspoons to milliliters. And I paste this code. So it takes teaspoons and it returns milliliter. I just cut a block of code and put it in a function. So double ml is teaspoons to ml. Sorry for pasting this. Double ml is equal, so milliliters is equal to that function call, teaspoons to ml, and I pass in the teaspoons. Very simple, intuitive. And then I just need to print this all. Print what I converted into what. And I will do that. So I cut that block of code and create one more function. And this time, this function simply prints text on a console. It does not return anything. A function which does not return anything has to have a return type as well. And it's very confusing, I understand, but soon I will explain what that means. So a function which doesn't return anything has a return type of void. Sorry about going fast of cutting and pasting. So other than these two functions, I just cut a block of code and I am about to paste the code into this function. For now, I'll just call it print and I paste that code. So I cut a block of code, I create a new function, and I paste the contents in this function. And this function has two things. So it has teaspoons, and it also has milliliters. And if I go here, I will pass teaspoons and milliliters. So this function, there is no extra special difficult code that we have just created. And you might be thinking, why did we take perfectly working code from main and split it in 3 functions? Why, you ask? To make it very readable and to allow some flexibility for it eventually. Splitting code is fundamentally how you simplify things. So now, if I look at the main function, I can clearly see what we're doing. We get teaspoons from the console, we convert them to milliliters, and then we print what we converted to what. How that happens is none of our concern. And that is the fundamental thing of programming, not caring how things happen and just using what there is made for you. That is the fundamental concept in programming. Know what you want and understand how to use things, but you don't need to understand how they work unless you are specifically, working for improving those things. But if you're just using them, it doesn't matter how they work. It just works. So we have 3 functions and 3 function calls here. And again, someone asked, does it matter where we place our functions? And again, for a computer, it does not. And thus, I can place one function here. I can place the other function here. And if I look at my code right now, I will rip my hair from my head because I will not be able to understand what's written. Stuff is at the top, stuff is at the bottom. How am I supposed to read it? And the answer is, it's very difficult to read it like this. And therefore, I would much rather read code as if I was reading a book. So I'll undo a few times. And here is what we have. So this reads much better. Again, a summary of our program, just like a paragraph, just like a title in a book, is at the top, and then each paragraph is a function. If you want to read a paragraph, go ahead and open it. But if you just want to figure out what the story is about, you don't need to, go and read throughout the whole of it. I remember when I was a student in school, I would cheat sometimes in lessons. In literature, I would read a summary of a book and I would try to analyze the summary really well, and that would be enough to convince my teacher that I read the book, even though I haven't. So that's the same thing. That's the same thing with code. You don't need to understand the inner workings. And that's a very big trap if you do try to understand it. Don't try to understand everything, how things are working. Just try to understand how to use them. And that is enough. That is definitely good enough for you, for the most part. So we have a function which returns nothing, as we mentioned, void. What does it mean for a function to return nothing? And what does return mean in the first place? Actually, I can even write a return statement here, and nothing will change. The compiler hints me that it's not necessary in this case. So if I run my program now, I'm just double checking if I didn't mess anything up. I'll type 15, sorry. I think I crashed it. I type 15, and again, the exact same thing happened, which is great. But what does this return mean? Where do we return, or what do we return? So we don't return anything, and that's what void tells us. But we do return. We return to the place we were called from. So basically, the flow of application is this. We go into the console, in get teaspoons from console, and then our program from this line 26, it jumps to line 35. It then proceeds to line 39, 41, and 43. And this return statement doesn't mean that we will proceed to this line. It means that we will return to the place where this function was called, to line 26, and then continue in line 27 and go down and down and down. And the same with teaspoons to milliliters. This means we jump to this function and go here, and return means that from line 53, we go back to line 27. And print right here means that from line 56, we go to line 61, 62, 64, and line 64 moves us back to this one. Again, this is redundant, so it can be removed at ease. Question for you. If I put return statement here, what will this method do now? Would anyone dare to guess? What would the method print do if I put a return statement at the start? That is true. It will not do anything because based on the same logic again, what happens is that we go to the print method, line 28, and in line 58, we don't go further, we simply return to where we were called, so to line 28. Therefore, we do not do that. Yep. Return has to be in the end, and for a function which returns nothing, there doesn't have to be no return in the like altogether, because it understands when this function ends, you will return anyways, so you don't need to put one. Now let me try to show you the power of functions. So we are getting teaspoons from console. This function, it's not very good. It's not very good because it's too specific sometimes. What if we want a different unit like a cup or a tablespoon or a teaspoon? What if we want a tablespoon? What if we want a fluid ounce, an ounce, for example? We should make this a little bit more flexible. So the specific part is this one. I shouldn't care what unit specifically I get, because the way I get different units will be exactly the same. The only difference is that when I get some unit, when I want a different unit, I should simply say that I want that different unit. So I'll say unit. Unit will go as an argument. I will put a unit and ask for something in return. So I put a unit here. And now I need to do string interpolation because my hard-coded teaspoons value, this one, now turns into a unit. String interpolation, remember, a $sign and the curly braces and a variable in between. And then what follows, I will just refactor this to be more generic. So instead of teaspoon text, I write amount text. Instead of teaspoon amount, I write amount. And I pass in this for conversion. And then the converted amount, I return. And there is that. Same code, but made a little bit more generic. I'm getting get amount from console. I'm getting some amount from console. So I need now I copy paste this method here. And then now I need to provide a unit. What unit am I getting? So I'll say I'm getting milliliters. And sorry, I'll say I'm getting teaspoons. And teaspoons to milliliters, I pass in teaspoons and I get milliliters back. Perfect. Again, this function needs to change because now I don't know if I'm passing teaspoons. I know that I'm passing cooking unit. And this will be milliliters. I'm converting some cooking unit amount to milliliters. I'm converting some cooking unit amount, so I also need a cooking unit. So cooking unit amount is what I had before, teaspoons. And my teaspoons, hard-coded teaspoons, now go as argument, as a cooking unit. And that is all. So that's the changes for this function. I'll close, and I'll go back here. So now I just need to say, well, so I did ask for teaspoons, so I basically need to say teaspoons again here as well. Because here, sorry for being a little bit too fast, I'll go through this soon. What did we just do? We used to have a function, and I'll do a few times. We used to have a function which always takes teaspoons and converts them to milliliters. But now we just said our function can be a little bit more generic. It can take not only teaspoons, but any cooking unit. But to make it accept any cooking unit, we have a problem. Well, first our variables are weirdly named, and then this description also needs to change in some way so that we can provide a cooking unit into this function. So instead, what I added is, I'll slowly go through. I renamed teaspoons into cooking unit amount, and I added a cooking unit itself so that this hard-coded teaspoons get replaced with cooking unit that we pass, and that cooking amount could go to the teaspoons part. We don't know if it's teaspoons or cups or something similar. We just know it's some cooking unit amount. So the variable, the argument name, the function argument name represents our intention. And we just rename it. So there's that. And teaspoons get replaced with some cooking unit that we pass the function. And we just passed a new argument to the print function, our cooking unit, which is teaspoons. So if I run the program now and hit 15, I still have the same results. So why did I go through so much effort making the function more generic? Why did I go through effort and putting unit as an argument and here as well? Well, basically now I can have, with very little changes in code, of code, I can now read different units of cooking. So it's very flexible and it gives me power to do nice things. So, here we converted teaspoons. I'll also have a tablespoon. And the only difference now will be that I write tablespoon. But I also need the conversion. So the little problem that we still have is the fact that we will need, for every conversion, add a new function. So I'll copy paste this. And I'll say not teaspoons, but tablespoons. We don't need these comments. And it's not 4.93, it's 14.79. Tablespoons. So that is literally the only change we had, like a very similar function that converts slightly differently. And then I say ml of, just so the variables aren't, the same, because if I write tablespoons to ml and pass tablespoons, ml here, it's ambiguous. You cannot have variables in the same scope being here. You cannot have the same named variables within the same scope. So you need to name them differently. So I'll name them milliliters of teaspoons. And this one I'll rename to milliliters of tablespoons. So tablespoons. I'll rearrange code a little bit so that stuff that goes together is close together, and stuff that, like a different unit will move in a different place. So here I pass not milliliters, but milliliters of teaspoons. And here I will copy this line because I want the same thing. And instead of teaspoons, I'll put tablespoons. And here, instead of ml of tablespoons, instead of ml of teaspoons, I'll put ml of tablespoons. So basically, with very little changes, I can now reuse my function. And this is the new part, the only new part that I needed to add for it to work with tablespoons. Right now, it's very primitive, and there's actually a way to simplify this further. But for this lesson's sake, it will be enough. So again, remember when I said that this main function should simply say what we do? And no, not right now. It is actually a bit complex. And again, we can split it further to functions, because I need to read 6 lines to figure out what it does. But what does it do? It converts teaspoons to milliliters, and then it converts tablespoons to milliliters. So I'll split these blocks of code into 2 functions. Static void print table teaspoons to milliliters. And then another one, static void print tablespoons to milliliters. I forgot to change this variable. This code will be up after the lesson. Yes, it's in the link in the video. I just need to update that link with the latest changes. And finally, we simply call those 2 functions in the main function. And again, the purpose is the same. By looking at the main function, I can clearly understand what it does. It prints how many teaspoons does a milliliter, how many milliliters are teaspoons, and how many milliliters are tablespoons. That's what the function does. How many lines did I have to read? 2 lines. And I understand clearly what the function does. If I am unclear what this function does, I can always go inside its contents and explore what the function does. And then the same for every step within the function. I can go deeper, deeper, and deeper until I get into very low-level details. But again, this reads like a book. This is like the book title. This is like a paragraph title. This is like a paragraph itself. So this is like a paragraph title. This is the paragraph itself, the sentences. And every function thereafter is like the sentence itself with its words. So the whole point of splitting functions like this is that we get very readable and easy to understand code. And that is the fundamentals of writing code. And you learned a ton today because it doesn't get that much complex than this. Fundamentally, it will be very similar. So let me show you one more thing. 2 more things, actually. So I can always put the return value of a function as an argument of another function, as long as it returns a value. It's possible, but I wouldn't recommend it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. This is valid syntax, but don't do it because it makes reading code much harder. So we will not do it. A line of code should do one thing, and when you put a function call within another function call, it no longer does one thing. A line of code should do one thing like it does right now. And lastly, what I wanted to show is that in C#, actually 2 more things I wanted to show. So in C#, you don't have to always specify a variable type. Sometimes variable types become this long, and it might be really tedious to write them by hand. Sometimes it might be dead clear what the type is. For example, if I have text, 100% the type will be a string. There is no question about that. And C# is actually smart enough to figure it out for you. So instead of writing double, I can simply write var, short for variable, and it understands that the underlying type for here is a double. If I hover over the var, you can still see it's double. Very simple. And going back, let's say we demo one more thing, which in this scenario is not very useful, but it's very important to know. So let me think. Let's say we have bottles. We have bottles to which we can put our units of cooking, which we converted to milliliters, which we can put into bottles of 100 milliliters. So I'll put a comment. We have bottles of 100 milliliters. How many bottles can we fill after the conversion? And I'll do a little sin, which is not very important, but it's not the best thing to do. So a little sin that I will do right now is when we convert tablespoons to ml, we will also return the converted milliliter value. So I'm changing the return type to double now. And as I mentioned, we are returning milliliters of tablespoons. And I'll do the same for this one as well. Milliliters of teaspoons. Again, our requirements ask us how many bottles can we fill? How many 100 milliliter bottles can we fill with these units converted into milliliters together? So we need to merge them. And from now on, I'll use var almost always for types. And someone asked, why is var not used all the time for defining a variable type? And in reality, it's used almost always. But some people say that it makes code unclear. And there are scenarios when it definitely does, or scenarios where it is dangerous even to do so. But as a beginner, I would say that you should avoid using var, because you should understand yourself always what type will your variable have, regardless of it being that simple. Practice having it explicitly defined. So yeah, I should avoid that. I'm really a big lover of var, but I will use double. So double teaspoons, ml of teaspoons, and another one is ml of tablespoons. Okay. So how much do we have in total? The total is this. And I could actually simply go ahead and just add these together. Probably that's a more simple thing to do. So that's my total ml. I simply said, so we get this and we get that, and we add those together, and that's our total milliliters. And how many liters, how many bottles of 100 milliliters can we fill? The answer is we take those total milliliters and we divide them from 100. And here is a little problem. When we divide a double from an integer, and an integer is a type for whole numbers, for numbers which we use to count things like one person, two people, there is no such thing as half a person, right? So a number, integer, is used for counting things. Int is a whole number. And when we use whole number, and to be more precise, when we store numbers, when we use numbers in operations with like higher accuracy and more space, Double is much more bigger than an integer. So when we use numbers like double, we need to say very explicitly to the compiler, how do we convert a double? Because double divided from integer is still a double. So how do we convert a double and store it in an integer? Strongly typed. Okay, I'll explain what strongly typed is after I'm finished with this one. Bear with me. So the problem here is that we have a double and we need to store it as an integer. How do we do that? So we take brackets, and again, brackets, like in arithmetics, suggest that this thing happens first. So we get our result first, and we then convert that result into an integer. This thing is called casting. We basically say to the program, listen, this is a double, but we understand very well what we are doing. And I am actually telling you to ignore the fact that this is a double and completely drop a fraction. So basically, bottles count will now be this number divided from 100 without a fraction. And if I type this now, the answer is, so let's play around with what we have. Please enter teaspoons amount 15. Please enter tablespoons amount 15. How many bottles is that in total? Almost 300, but not quite. Therefore, it was 2, the answer. 2 bottles filled. Filled bottles count. Let's try again. Let's try this time with 1 and 1. Right. Obviously, this had to be at least 1 bottle. So basically, I think we need to write +1 here, because there's always at least 1 bottle going to be filled. I mean, if we... Yeah, if we power a little bit, just a little bit, you already have 1 bottle. And since we are operating on doubles, you'll always have 1 bottle. Always. Unless it's 0, 0, 0, then you will not. So let me try again. 1 and 1 is 1, because in total, I should also print a total. So total ml can fill of 100 ml can fill bottles of 100 ml. So 1 and 1. So 19.72 can fill 1 bottles of 100 ml, just like we expect, right? Let's create a more wild number. So now we have 36.74, and again, yes, it can fill 4 bottles of 100 milliliters. So we have our little conversion demo. It's far from a finished application, but we'll gradually grow and make it. Let me try one more thing. So floating point, remember? This doesn't need a floating point, but this one does. So F2 once again. All right. And again, the same thing. We take this piece of code and we make a function out of it. Static void print how many 100 ml bottles. And I just paste that in. How do I know how many? We need to take input, which is double total ml, or rather just ml, because the total, the word total, is just the context that is here. So we don't need to be so specific. We don't care if it's total or not. We can fill them one by one after all. So just double checking if it's working, and everything seems to be working as expected. A very simple application for cooking units conversion. Last bit is to try and understand what happened here. How come we divide a number such as, so what happens when we divide these two numbers? What's the result? And this is a very fundamental mistake that beginners make. The answer is 0. Because this is an integer, and this is an integer as well. If we divide two integers together, we still have an integer. Integer and integer is an integer, and thus the result is an integer as well. And what does that mean? That means that even though this is 0.5, we drop the fraction. We only can take a whole number, and this is nothing like that. So 1 divided from 2 is 0, but if you say 1.0 divided from 2, you will get 0.5. Because what happened here? Integer divided from integer is an integer. But here, a double divided from integer is a double. And same goes for other operations. If you take 1.0 and add 1, you are getting 2.0. Because double plus integer is a double. Basically, when you perform arithmetic operations, it takes the type which takes more space, which is bigger, which offers more, not necessarily accuracy, but capacity is a good way to put it. So the bigger type consumes the smaller one, and the result will be of the bigger type. So keep this one in mind because it's very important. 1 divided from 2 without any other constraints is 0, and that's in almost all programming languages. Very important to know. And if you do this, it's going to be an error. We can try that. If I type CW and press tab, it autocompletes to Console.WriteLine. Let me move this here, let's say. All right. So Console.WriteLine, if I divide 1 from 0, my computer will basically explode. It doesn't even let me run because it knows it fails. So it says arithmetic problem in constant value computation. Division by constant zero. It is not possible. It will not work. So I will not try. You always should validate against zero, but we're not talking about validation today. The topic is just the basics, which you already got a hang of. So that is pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. And I think you learned quite a lot. Do you have any questions? Do you have any questions before we move on to the next stage? And the next stage is a surprise for you because I didn't talk about it. SPX asked, does system always round down? And the answer is no, it doesn't always round down. It simply, for an integer, it just means that it dropped the fraction altogether. There is no rounding. It just has a whole number and a fraction. And it drops the fraction altogether and just keeps the whole number. That's how it works. The course wiki is in the video description. You should find it there. I will link all the material needed if it's not in the description, but I think it is. So please let me know if you cannot find it and we'll do something about it. Someone also asked, what did I do to display different types? When I type var, I can still, see what type it was. I don't remember where I put it. Here, for example. So I write var, and it still says it's a string. How does that happen? How does it know? That's ReSharper. The extension I'm using is ReSharper. It's a paid extension. So there's that. Can you explain strongly typed? That's a very good point. I was supposed to and I forgot. So strongly typed means that if I have a double, if I have a string, for example, text, ABC, I cannot suddenly take text, and say that text is equal to a number. I cannot do that. When I declare a variable, and this is a variable declaration and assignment, when I declare a variable, it has a fixed type. The type doesn't change. And the benefit of that is that I can now operate on a string. I can format it however I want. I can do crazy stuff with it. I can do everything I desire. A lot of things I can do, and I don't need to guess what I can do because the type, since I know the type, tells me what I can do with the variable. So I'll put it here probably. Strongly typed means that I don't need to guess what I can do with a class or a variable. That's a very important point. So when I get errors, they will be before my application runs in compile time. What I mean by that is if I have a string text, ABC, and an integer, so I have a string text, and then I try to assign to that string a number, and I try to run my application, it says error. It says, I cannot do that. I'm strongly typed. How am I supposed to convert myself to 1? What does weakly typed mean? In C#, there is a keyword called dynamic. Don't mix it with var. Dynamic cuts strongly typed from C# and makes it weakly typed. So with dynamic, I no longer have any errors. So if I run my application now, there was no error. But you might say, why don't we write dynamic everywhere if it prevents errors? Well, because this can be anything really, and it works. That's the biggest drawback of weakly typed languages, because I can run the code and have exceptions only after I run the application. It doesn't see nothing wrong with this line of code, and I'll only realize it after I run my code. So don't do that. Dynamic. So weakly typed means that there is no check on what a function or variable can do. We can do that with dynamic keyword, dynamic A is perfectly fine C# code, except it's not. You shouldn't use dynamic ever, and even if there are very few niche cases, I would strongly recommend against using it. Practically, I haven't used it for the last year. So for a beginner, never. It was parsing scenario, but for a beginner, never. Don't use it. And that is all I wanted to talk about in this lesson. And now the fun part. The Kahoot. So here is a pin for a game. A pin for a game. Please join. For Kahoot, you need to open this in your browser. Open this in your browser. Enter the game pin. You can also use your mobile app if you have one. And it's a quiz. It's a fun little quiz, a game to play. So I'll give you a few minutes to join. Take your time. So the lesson will soon end, at least the main part of it, the theory. Remember, if you have consultations, if you want to talk about something further, like if you couldn't follow along or have problems, there's still 1 hour after 8 p.m. UTC when you will be able to have a talk with me on Discord voice channel. Or through chat, but preferably voice chat. And lastly, in video description, you will find a link to feedback survey, which I would appreciate you all to fill. I'll link it in the announcement channel as well. Anyways, I think we're ready. Let's start. C# keywords and console. This video will be able for rewatch, yes. For now, a warm-up question. Just pick what you think. I'll lower the volume because it's a bit over me. It's a warm-up question just to, get the hang of what you need to press. On your browser, press something, and on your application or the browser, but not on the one that you're watching this. I'm sorry if it's not working. If it's the first time you're using Kahoot, then we can talk about this after lesson as well as we go through. But for now, I hope it'll be okay. So the actual quiz starts now. So what best describes Visual Studio? What is it? That's a part of feedback. If you know, if you feel like this is too fast, I'll try to adjust time in the future. Oh, wow. I probably didn't define this very well. So if we Google what Visual Studio is, it says Visual Studio is full-featured IDE to code, debug, test, and deploy to any platform. So it is an IDE, and an IDE is an environment with all the needed tooling. All the needed tooling. It can run your application. You can write code in that environment. You can debug, troubleshoot, and a lot of many things. It's much more than just writing code. So no, it's not just the code editor. And it's good that you guys failed because you will remember. Is my camera blocking the question? Oh my god, it is. That is that is so funny. Okay. Oh my god. Okay. That's good. Fun. But someone knew what was coming. No restarts. Everyone failed, so it's not bad. Which language is not a part of .NET? No restarts, no. Okay, I didn't talk about this, so it's a bit of common sense. Guys, don't help others. The answers that others say might be wrong. Don't help. Let others think. But I'm glad that most people know. If variable number is assigned to quotes 4 to 2, what type is number? So one person selected var. It's not var. Var is not the type in itself. The trick part is it is a number and it could be an integer, but the quotes is what makes it text. So it is text. Be careful when you make a choice. And well done, Damien, being number 1. But others are catching up. 1 divided from 2 will result in programming world what result? Well done. People remember. Again, integer divided from integer has to be an integer. 0.5 is not an integer, and therefore it was not the right answer. We simply take the whole number minus the fraction, and 0.5 minus the fraction is still 0. What is a namespace? I mentioned it at the start a few times. It is a container for classes. There's nothing more than that. What does this do? What does a using statement do? What's it used for? So it takes all the classes and basically copy pastes them under the hood so you can access them in code. All right, let's continue. Okay, someone moved ahead, Pi moved ahead. Can a program have more than one meaningful entry point? Remember what is an entry point in console application? And what happens when you have multiple of them? And can you have multiple of them? So if you have multiple entry points, and I'll actually show, it's not very important, but it's like a nice to know. What do I mean by that? Actually, I'll just double click. No, I don't want double click. Properties, debug. Sorry, not, yeah. I actually don't remember exactly where that was. Nope, not here, not here. Well, anyways, in these properties, somewhere in these properties, you can configure what the entry point is. You can also configure it here. Maybe by default, it's not needed because the default one is anyways program main. But if you have multiple entry points, the program wouldn't know which one to use to start itself. So you need to be very specific and therefore use just one of them. Let's move on. 5 seconds to read the question. Okay. I'll keep that in mind for future and extend the time. Sorry about that, guys. Like button, okay. Which statement is false? It's a little tricky and I didn't talk about this, so you might not know, but I will show. I'll show what I mean. I'll first save the changes so that I don't mess this up. And don't mind what I just did. It doesn't matter. So what happens if I delete the project file? It's gone? Or is it gone? It's actually still there. You see, my app is all right. Nothing wrong happened with it. It's still there. And if I want to add it back, I can still, add an existing project, which I will. All good, no issues. However, if I delete the program file, it says it will be deleted permanently. And obviously, if I click OK, I will no longer have it physically. So if I go back to directory, I no longer see that program file. So be very careful not to do that. I have a version control and I can undo my changes. So don't mind me, but be very careful with what you do. Yeah, be careful not to do that. I should have mentioned and I forgot, but some of you know that. Sorry. Let's go on. What is C equal to in this scenario? Think just like you would think in maths. In arithmetics, the same rules apply, but also rules of programming apply as well. So think twice before you make a choice. Is it 0? Maybe 5? Maybe 1? Or maybe 9? Famous last words, I know this. Well done for the majority. So let's analyze what just happened. So if we follow arithmetics, the first thing we do is we take 10 and divide it. So we take minus 10 and divide it from 5. Sorry, from 10. B is 10. So we take minus 10 and divide it from 10. And that is minus 1. And then we do multiplication because division and multiplication is first. So we take 5 and multiply it from 2. And we get 10. So we have 10 on this side and minus 1 on this side. 10 minus 1 is 9. Yeah. All right, next. Julian is number 1. Well done. Gregory second and Darius is third. Double points, comeback time. What will be printed to console? Be careful with what you choose, please. Be very careful with how and what the symbols are placed. It's a tricky one. Let's see how many people fell for it. Not that many. So This is string interpolation, but just because we have string interpolation doesn't, make it interpolate strings. A and B is literally just a string A and B. To make it variables A and B, they need to be between curly braces. So unless we add those curly braces, there won't be any hello world for us. So A and B is what will be printed. And the scales have turned. Damien third, Darius second, and Gregory first. What happens if a user does not input a number in this scenario? Yes, it will be an error. And failing rather than succeeding with some arbitrary value is something that we as programmers should avoid, because that's like hiding a problem. There is a serious problem if you were expecting a number and you got text. That is a massive impact to the result. All right. Is this a valid declaration? You have A defined, declared in two different functions. Will you be able to compile such code? Yes, you will, because there are two different scopes and you can have the same variables in different scopes. Gregory, Damien, and JM. Which is more accurate, double or decimal? Yes, local variables. Thank you. So last question to determine the podium, the winners of the first lesson. A decimal is more accurate, and a decimal is an absolute necessity when you're dealing with money, because it is the highest precision number format in C#. And the winners: 11 out of 14, JM, Damien, 11 out of 14 as well, and 12 out of 14, Gregory. So congratulations, guys. The noble mentions Bai and Darius as 4th and 5th place. So thank you, and that is all for this lesson. I will now continue into voice channel if you need any consultations and help with getting to a point where you were with this lesson. So I'll join the voice channel and I'll wait 5 minutes for people to come if you want to, learn something extra about the lesson, something is unclear. You have roughly 50 minutes of my time. And I hope the lesson was useful. where do you find homework? So homework can be found in a wiki of the first lesson at the very bottom. I'll give a link. Whoops, that's not this one. So this is the homework. Thanks, guys. Again, I'll wait a few minutes more. If nobody comes, that's fine, and the lesson will be finished at there because it was a simple lesson, so that's fine. I'll double check the chat in the meanwhile, see what's up there. Okay, everything seems to be fine. How do we submit the homework? So for starters, the homework will be in BC Bootcamp channel. Also, hello, whoever joined. If you have any questions, please let me know. I actually don't hear anything you say, so let me adjust something. Give me a moment. Let's see. I see you try to speak, but I don't hear anything. Does anyone hear anything? Nope. Give me a moment. I'm sorry. Let me change the output device. Nope, I don't hear anything. Speakers, this one. Okay, that's good. I should be able to hear you now.
Do we open a section for each lessons?
What do you mean?
For example, some run across any issue and solve a solution for this issue. We can write there, maybe in GitHub, for example.
For what topic? Issue for what topic? If you can, please clarify. Ken?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I asked a question in this chat. My question is, can you put some more links in the wiki of the course that give more explanation for beginner, or maybe some links to your previous bootcamp so we can use that to...
So did you have a look at this link? And
what links?
I posted it in the VC text channel. I'll ping you once again.
Okay.
Did you have a look at this one?
Yes, I did.
And you still would like to learn a few more things about,
like maybe some code snippet, because on the beginning of the course I was a little bit disturbed with my kids, so I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure, because this link, if you go through it and read it, it should have, like, there is no more information than what I did during the lesson. So there is this link, and then there is a link for what I did in code itself. Maybe that will be useful too. So the second one is literally what I wrote in the past 2 hours.
Okay.
So if you click on
Yes.
maybe
I
it's
think
not there.
I think I will find everything there.
Uh,
Otherwise, I will test you again in the Discord.
okay, I had to push. Sorry. Push. Yeah, now you should find that all that's needed. I mean, what we had in the lesson itself.
Mhm.
If you have like feedback, something is missing, you would like something added, etc., etc.,
Mhm.
please
I was talking
let me
about
know.
an issue I
Yes.
run into. It
Yeah.
was when I type decimal number,
Yes.
I had to use comma.
Yes.
When I use dot, it gives some error, wrong result. I'm talking about this issue.
Mm-hmm.
In order to solve this,
Yes.
and
Can
I
you
need
share your
to.
screen to double check if I understand you? So
Uh,
you're talking
there
about
is a class. There is a class culture info dot environment culture.
okay. Can
I
you
added this option.
paste the code snippet for that problem so I can better fully understand double check if I fully understand.
Where do I paste it?
You can paste it in VC text. Gary asked if homework is the same as Bootcamp version 1. The very first homework is the same, but future homework is likely to be different. The first one is the same, but second and further will not be. So what's the A in your case? A is equal to something like this. To be able to use dot when using decimal. Okay. I think you can use USA culture. Let me try it out. Okay.
I think some cultures use comma. In Turkey, we use
Yes.
comma instead of dot,
So you want both to
separating
work?
for decimals.
Do you want
Yes.
both to work?
Yeah. In order to be dot, use dot to separate decimal number. I needed to add culture info environment culture property.
Yes.
Some maybe come across this issue as I read from internet. Some German culture also use this convention. I talked about this. Maybe some we can open some section for each lecture, and we add this permanent. This stays it there. So when someone else watch the
I
video,
see. Yeah, I'll mark this. So you basically are suggesting to add a section on parsing numbers from different cultures when a number can be either with a comma or with a dot, and how do you do that, right?
maybe we can open a section in GitHub for each lecture, so students can add the solutions, the problem they come across while solving the problems.
Sure, I'm happy for that. I think we have the platform for that. I could move it like at the end of lesson and like fast Q&A, like short Q&A, like for things like that, how you do this, how you do that, like some of the more common things. So I'll mark this in the issues list to add sections for common student problems per lesson. Okay. I will do that. Okay, add it. I mean, the issue, I'll think about how to do that tomorrow.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think it's because of operating system language. It is Turkish. This kind of things can happen.
What is because of operating system language?
This culture info invariant culture property.
Yes, it depends on where you are.
Yes. If John can change the operating system language, I think it will be fixed.
Yes, but like by providing a culture, a different culture, you can be more in control. I don't remember by heart which one to use when, but everything is doable.
Yes.
Hey, when is homework due, and do we turn it in GitHub?
First homework, just paste it in the homework channel. It's due, well, it's not really ever due. I mean, there are no deadlines, but I think ideally for you, it would be if you do it by the next lesson. So by next Sunday, 6 p.m. UTC.
All right, cool. Thanks, man.
And if I were to upload it to the GitHub, how exactly do I do it? I go to my fork and then I just press add file, right? And that would be about it.
There are a few more steps, and I have created a guide for it in the previous bootcamp. Let me give you a link. That's the link.
Question.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, just wondering, are you ever gonna go over GitHub and then Git control?
Am I going through those topics?
Yeah. Are you ever going
Yes.
to go over those topics in the future
Yes.
lessons, like next week?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Sometime in next or next week.
Okay, like how to set up GitHub and whatnot, right?
Yeah, maybe in a month, like no longer than in a month.
All right, cool. Thanks, man.
No problem.
Okay, thanks for your guide. I'll look through it and get going from there.
Okay.
And that will be about it for today's for my questions.
Okay.
So bye.
Bye. Good luck.
Yes, I'm leaving too. Thank you so much.
No problem. Good luck. If you have any questions, feel free to ask anytime.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you for the night. Goodbye.
You're welcome. Bye. I'll be going as well in that case, so thank you all for watching. It was fun doing the lesson. See you next Sunday. Bye.